I am very pleased to be joined by our two presenters today, with whom many of you may already have had the pleasure of working. Cathy Folkes is Chief Data Officer with RKD Group. She was working in big data long before she or anyone else knew to call it that. She launched her first company at the age of 21, managing data for nonprofits and major political campaigns. She developed fundraising software, which she sold to what was then a small data processing firm called Merkle. You may have heard of it. Cathy went on to work for them for 14 years during their growth period to the agency that we all know now. She developed CRM analytics and reporting environments for many organizations, including AARP, American Cancer Society, Dell, Disney, Habitat for Humanity, Nike, and Susan G. Komen for The Cure. Cathy is joined today by her colleague, T. Hill. T is Senior Vice President of Advanced Analytics with RKD Group, providing senior strategic leadership for their analytics services, including custom modeling and program analytics to transform nonprofit marketing and fundraising programs. He's been with RKD Group for 9 years. Interestingly, prior to coming to RKD, T was also with Merkle. He was serving as their Director of Quantitative Solutions for Nonprofits for nearly 10 years. So clearly, we are in excellent hands today for this particular topic. Both T and Cathy have a lot of information to share. They're going to go through their entire deck, and then we'll reserve about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please use the Q&A box to submit questions throughout, and we'll be monitoring and selecting from those at the end. We also invite you to use the chat box today, setting the setting on there for all attendees to be able to view your comments and questions. This is an opportunity if you want to share additional insights related to the content that you're seeing in the program, or if you'd like to raise up questions for some crowdsourced response during the program, in addition to what T or Cathy are sharing. With that, let me turn it over to our expert presenters with RKD Group.
Great, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're happy to be sharing this information with you. So let's talk about the importance of data integration. We're going to start with the data governance construct and talk a little bit about what really constitutes data governance. So some of you may think of data governance as just rules around businesses and rules around data. But it really covers a large scope of managing your data itself. It includes your data management strategy, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, the data quality, how do we get there, the platform that it sits on, your operations, and the supporting processes. So it's about managing your data, who gets to use the data, when they get to use the data, and how good the data is. It's also the most important thing. So let's take an honest look at where nonprofit data engineering is right now. You know, you have to, first step is to admit you have a problem, right? So we want to look at the fact that most of you have multiple methods for managing your data. You've got it in different places. You have various levels of documentation, if documentation at all. Various levels of quality control depending on where your data is. Many of you may have a CRM with an Excel spreadsheet stuck in a drawer somewhere, with major donors that people are sure that they're not going to get mail because they're sitting in a drawer. Meanwhile, you're renting them on another list. Your data is probably not metadata driven, meaning how can we make sure that you're managing the data most efficiently, that you have the data that you need to understand campaigns, lists, packages, etc., all available when you need them. A lack of change management. So what happens when there's a data change or a process change? How is that communicated? How do you manage it internally? A lot of processes, I'm sure, are significantly staff dependent. How many times do you have data processes that are manual, where you're looking for things through spreadsheets, etc.? Do you have account management teams defining what the technical solutions should be? So who ultimately makes the decision? Is it a team? Is it an IT team that thinks they're marketers that think they're IT? Or how does that ultimately happen? And then how do you have a single point of knowledge for all data available? So do you actually know where all your data in your building is, who gets to use it, who gets to access it, what the rules are around it, etc.? So the bad news is nonprofit data quality is actually declining. I think this is due to a few things. One is there's a declining number of service bureaus. We all know that there used to be companies that manage data for other people, and they've just disappeared. There's only a few around these days. Some nonprofits are thinking they can manage the data themselves. It looks easy because there are tool sets that are available, but it's actually a lot harder than it looks when you get behind the curtain. I think there's a lack of understanding around the financial impact of poor data and missing data until it's too late. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Your CRM tools are probably not really connected, right? So is your email data connected to your direct mail data, to your telemarketing data, to your SMS data, to your media data? You know, how is that all connected? And then there are some CRM companies on the market today who don't really want to support the work. They want to sell tools. So I'm finding these days there are a lot of nonprofits that have these great new tools but don't have the internal management process or the skill sets to actually manage the data and the processes once it comes in the door. So, failing to be data-driven. The percentage of firms identifying themselves as data-driven is actually declining. It's interesting that we're getting worse at this, not better. So even scarier, the depth. 72% of nonprofits have yet to really forge a data culture. So we talk about being data-driven, but are the pieces really in place to do that? 69% report that they have not created a data-driven organization. 53%, and I would argue that's probably even higher, are not treating data as a business asset. So we talk about it all the time. I think we speak about it. We say that our data is our #1 asset, but then we don't invest in protecting that asset the way you would expect the #1 asset to be protected. And 93% identify people and processes as the obstacles in their data. So is it you don't have the right tools, the right people, etc. So let's take a little bit of a look at the cost of imperfect data. This is based on what's called the rule of 10. So identifying that for every good record that may cost $1, a bad record may cost $10. So if you have 890 records are perfect, 110 records are flawed. So the name is wrong, the salutation is wrong, the donation amount is wrong. The cost of what should actually be about $1,000 to manage that data is almost $2,000 now. So we need to start looking at what is the cost to our business of really not having better data. The other costs are lost customers, lost donors, bad decisions. So we see this all the time, and T will talk about this a little bit more, but if your data is not close to perfect, understanding it's never going to be perfect, you can be making some really bad decisions about the future of your organization. And then reputational damage, right? What's the impact of data that's being mailed out incorrectly or that's wrong to your organization or sending duplicates for your organization? So this is just a quick trick that I've learned years ago in sort of doing an assessment of the data quality of your organization. It was penned by Thomas Redmond as a Friday afternoon measurement. I don't ever suggest doing this on a Friday afternoon because it's usually by then I'm spent. But the idea is you basically take 100 of your last records and look at every element for those 100 new donors and figure out how much of that information is actually correct. So get 4 or 5 people in a room, take those 100 records and have everybody look at them. And look at name, salutation, donation, source of donation. And if you can figure out how many of those 100 records really look imperfect, you can get some idea of the quality of your organization's data. I think sometimes, and I'm just as guilty of this, we try to look at the entire data environment and figure out whether it's clean or not. But I think this is a quick way to just sort of take a look at your data quality and figure out, am I close to having good data, and where are the holes in my data? So, but just by taking a quick snapshot of 100 records. So it's a great trick. So we need to change the paradigm of our strategic management, right? So if we have a IT focus, we have a high risk of failure if it's only IT, right? Our business around data is really about being strategic and understanding how to manage it. It's not the tools and the processes to manage it, it's what we can actually do with that data. And then if we have a value generation, we have a low risk of failure. So understanding that the asset, the data, the people are really, really the important thing, not how you run it, not where you store it, not what the tool set is, but the data itself, you have a much higher chance of succeeding and making data strategy the hero. So some of the components of data strategy. You want to combine your strategy. So look at your donors holistically. You want to look at every channel. It's all about the donor, right? Not about the channel, not about the system. It's about the donor. Merge your data silos. This is probably one of the hardest things to do, and matching capabilities from system to system are tough, but they're not impossible. Understanding your campaign selection and execution across all channels. So looking at what you're doing inside of your organization across the board. You know, even for email, we find many times that there are email campaigns that are being run by your education department, your events department, your fundraising department at the same time, and they're all hitting the same people. So how do you have a vision for a data strategy that's not just about fundraising, but across your organization as well, so you really understand how you're communicating with them? Understanding reporting and business intelligence. So one of the things I always tell people is, when you're building a new data strategy, you want to look at what the outcomes need to be and what the reporting needs to be and work backwards. Don't build the data first and then figure out how to make it fit into your reporting. Go from backwards to forwards and plan for the future. Things change so fast. You know, there are new channels are changing, especially right now with COVID. How we communicate with our donors and our constituents can be very, very different. So making sure as you're thinking about data strategy that it's a rinse and repeat process, right? That you keep going back and looking at what you're doing on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly, semi-annually, and making sure that you're open to changes in your system and you're not building something that's just for today. Some elements of data strategy. I love this perspective. What you want to do in terms of really being a mature data organization is become offensive, not on the defense. So, you know, if you're defensive, you're always trying to ensure that the data is right. You're looking behind yours all the time, making sure that what you have is on time and available. What you want to do is be offensive, right? Trust your data and have it in a place where you can use it all the time and understand that it's there and available. Optimize the data so that it's easily accessible and usable. So how do you make sure that the data is there for analytics, it's there for reporting, and you're not spending the majority of your time checking to see if that data is right, or checking to see if you can get the data by the time you need it. And then a defensive strategy, your management is in control, right? So you've built something, you set it in stone, and you're gonna make sure that nobody comes inside your box. What you want is an organization that's flexible so that you can access change quickly, but still trust your data. And then enabling the architecture. This subject here sometimes confuses people because we all talk about the single version of the truth, and we want a single version of the truth. But what we'll also want is multiple versions of the truth. The data that you need for analytics may not be the same data that you need for managing internal processes. So how do you make sure that the data is right and available regardless of who's going to use it? So does this really happen? Is it not true? And I'm going to say that you can get there. So organizations that are committed to strategy as a primary have much higher volume of sustainable growth. So you have to understand, if you can manage your data strategy, you're actually going to impact your growth. So it's not fun for people sometimes, it's hard, but actually processing that will increase your income. And that's where you have to understand again that data is your most valuable asset. Invest in it and treat it like that and plan your strategy. So some ways to be strategic. You know, we have an organization we work with, they have a 5-year strategic plan. They're doing direct marketing to increase new donors acquired and multi-year donors. They focused on new donor acquisition through their strategy and multiple sources of the truth, and were able to really increase their revenue by focusing on, where do I want to go? Do I have the right data? Do I need external data? And am I sure that my data is actually integrated? Do I know what's happening online and offline? So how to start implementing a strategy. Identify your data management practices if you have them. If you don't, sit down and start putting them together. Create a roadmap for optimization of data management. Understand where all your data is coming from, where it's going, who gets to use it, when they get to use it, and also when you need to destroy it. Sometimes what people forget is at some point, data destruction is an important part of managing your data strategy. Assess your data quality. So do you know how many duplicates you have on your file? Do you know if your addresses are correct, etc.? What does your data look like? So making sure that you understand the quality of your data environment. And then integrate your data strategy into strategic planning. So as you're planning your campaigns, make sure that you're thinking about the data you have available. You know, do you have everything you need to do personalization, to do optimized data, donor journeys? Is it available in your data, or do you need to add additional data elements to the environment in order to get to what you need to do to succeed? So plan first. It's a lot easier to operate later. And then share your data strategy with your teams. Make sure that everybody understands how you're expecting to use the data, where you're expecting to use the data, and when the data will be available, and then how you're going to measure the success of your data.
Okay, thank you, Cathy. I think at this point in time, everyone realizes that data is king. And it's king for a reason. Everything you do begins and ends with data. And so we need to take the details and the high level communication and thinking that Cathy has provided and begin to provide the respect and the governance that data demands, because it is your most important asset. And unfortunately, too many organizations, they don't abide by or create a data-centric platform, and that needs to change for us to move forward. Can you go to the next slide?
Yep, sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
So when you talk about data, and we all know that it's important, and we all realize that if you have incomplete information or you have inaccurate information, right, you're going to lead unknowingly to poor decisions. Now, but we don't know what those poor decisions have in terms of a financial impact. But we all do agree that garbage in and garbage out is a real thing. Well, this slide here is meant to tell you one thing. What is that true cost of poor data? Cathy brought this to my attention a little while ago that IBM has estimated that in the US economy alone, not global, but just the US economy, right? We're like a $20 trillion a year economy. $3.1 trillion is the cost of bad data. That's tremendous. Now, when you break it down on average for single entities, it's about 15 to 25% of your organization's revenue. So if you're a nonprofit and you're making 10 million a year, what's 15 to 25% of that number to you? That's a lot of revenue and potential loss from the time of not having your data centralized and not having it single sourced and not providing the appropriate business rules and management and ETL and integrity. That's the cost that we need to trim down to a much smaller number. You can go to the next slide. So what is data integration really? This image here is a traditional form of data integration, right? And it's meaningful because data integration, it's massive, right? It's disparate data, multiple databases, flat files, third-party vendors, different API connectors. Think about how much time you may lose by just trying to get access to email and trying to understand when you contact someone, or trying to find an Excel spreadsheet that has the cost of a marketing event, or trying to figure out what was the mail date for a particular campaign, right? That, in many cases, I would say, client services historically may spend 40% of their time just trying to manage data. Analytic people may spend 60% of their time just trying to manage and transform and massage data. Imagine if 40% for client services was 10% and 60 for analytics was 30 to 20% through an integration platform that allows the automation of results, dashboard reporting, allowing to quickly create custom models that actually is solving for the issues that are true. Many times, analysts and modelers, they'll be brought forward in a reactive mode. Hey, we need to improve acquisition, or we need to improve, loop capture or something, right? And they'll begin to deploy or create a modeling solution without uncovering what are the issues that really exist. And even when they uncover them, because of incomplete and lack of information, they could be uncovering the wrong things and creating a model that all it does is accentuates what you're not doing correctly. So data integration looks like this, and it's important for us to get behind and to create internally. You can go to the next slide. So what are the benefits? I think the benefits are obvious, but I think it's important to communicate it. First and foremost, it has to be a cultural shift from top to bottom, right? It's not a one and done strategy. Those who try to, tip their toes into the water, they fail, right? They start a process and they never finish it. This is going to evolve over time as we expand our organizations into different marketing channels. Right now, for those who rely heavily on events are not happening right now because of COVID. What do you do about virtual events? How do you connect that appropriately to all of the different marketing channels that you have internally? How do you connect the dots? So the benefits of data integration is obviously improved decision-making, right? Once you are aware of the truth with speed and viable levels of efficacy, you make better decisions. Improved donor experience, right? This is about, think about this. Too many of us are thinking about it from a channel perspective. Let's be globalists, meaning let's be channel agnostic. You may have to focus on direct mail or focus on digital, but see the big picture. How are they connected across all of the marketing activities that you deploy within your organization? Once you have that purview, then you can make better decisions. Then you can actually communicate to the donor at the right time with the right message. And then streamlined operations. I think this is a natural conclusion. Your productivity should improve, and a net benefit is your costs that are spread across the organization, sometimes in duplication, should be reduced or eliminated to increase your operations, which means your productivity also improves. The logistics behind what you do becomes seamless, and then ultimately predicting the future, right, becomes significantly easier because now you have a single source of the truth that allows you to anticipate, right? And anticipation allows you to stay ahead of the curve and mindful of the environmental conditions that are impacting your particular vertical and organization. You can go to the next slide. So here we're going to pivot to understanding donor behavior to fill strategy, right? And when you go to the next slide, this slide, here, I kind of touched upon it, right? The best way to predict the future is to create it, right? I love that slide, right? Because as an analyst, and people say, well, what's my 5-year outlook? Well, we need to first make sure that 70% of your revenue isn't dedicated to white mail, right? Because if that's the case, it's hard for you to understand how direct mail or digital or whatever TV, how is it driving other forms of marketing revenue, right? When you go to your board to make an investment argument, if you're unable to say this channel leads into this other revenue, therefore I need more, then you're unprepared to get the investments you need, and you're unprepared to create the future that your organization definitely can walk into because you don't have all the story, you don't have all the information, you're not leading from a data-driven approach. Can we go to the next slide? So once you do all the data governance diagnostics, here are some 4 critical steps to help you get there. First and foremost, we must lead any organization through the guide of long-term net. Long-term value, meaning gross, is all well and good, but it's only a sprinkle of net if you're lucky. Long-term net allows you to understand at the point that I acquire someone, irrespective of channel, how much net revenue over time is that going to bring me, right? And that changes your perspective around who you acquire, and you can break it down by any attribute you choose. What does the initial gift amount matter in the areas of creating my next normal over time and my net revenue? Does age matter? Absolutely. Seasonality, no question. Geographic location, control package, list, media, all this matters. Once you have that, then you can have a plan to go from point A to point Z and create a future effectively. Step two is really about understanding, your critical metrics, right? We all know whether or not retention or value or frequency is a good thing, theoretically, moving up or down. But too often I find we rely on other organizations and how their retention looks, how their value looks, how their giving frequency showcases. But unless you are mailing in the same service area with the same personnel, with the same marketing messages, you're not them. It's good from a directional perspective, but then you must need to understand, what is your performance floor? What is your performance ceiling? And it's a simple math of standard deviation plus or minus history. That gives you your true benchmark, what you should be striving for, getting above the floor and breaking that ceiling to create new ones. And then once you understand that, uncovering the financial impact. When retention is flat or moving up or down relative to your donor movements, is it a financial liability? Is it a financial asset? That will give you priorities in terms of what you have to fix and why. That may lead to a modeling solution or some basic forms of segmentation changes. Next, we go into core balance, right? And core balance is about attrition, right? Too often we think about attrition in the most simplistic way, which is active donors in and active donors out. But there's a deeper level, a more sophisticated level that tells you a greater piece of how you move to the next normal, which is core, people who give for 2 or more consecutive years. For direct mail, if you're optimized, they drive 40% of gross revenue, 60% of net. They have the highest likelihood of moving through the giving pyramid, of becoming mid and major and planned giving. And in this environment, these are the people who help keep you moving forward through an economic downturn. Now, digital is a smaller proportion if you haven't grown off the backs of direct mail, but core is still important for digital as well. Uncovering how many donors you need in terms of acquisition, how many donors you need to retain, allows you to plan for balancing core. And at the same time, 75% of balancing core is through acquisition, and 25% is through improving cultivation and retention appropriately. Now, once you've done all these 3 steps, step 4 is about really setting yourself up to experience accelerated levels of financials, right? Where number 1, you're creating a pipeline that's going to be able to leverage all of the prior steps. So when you come out of, let's say right now, an economic downturn, you can experience viable levels of mid, major, and planned giving. Now, if we go to the next slide, now I do see, is there an audio problem going on? Okay, audio is working for others. Okay, yep. I'm going to ignore that. So this slide here, COVID-19 scenario, we put this slide in because I think each and every one of us is asking, or thinking about, COVID-19, what does that mean to me personally? And what does it mean to the industry in my vertical? Well, there is an emerging consciousness and consensus around expectations around COVID. And the purpose of this slide is to really give you a sense of what is the disruption runway or time, right? And depending on that disruption runway and time, will determine how you are going to experience the environment that we live in. If you are in the human services to some degree, right, you are experiencing a boom. You are riding that wave because you're helping people. Now, when you come out of the boom, we gotta factor out, okay, will my metrics begin to recede? If you're not in, let's say, human services and you have a slowdown, Well, when will that slowdown theoretically pick up? Now, here are three particular options that I continue to hear again and again from Goldman Sachs and from Fidelity and Schwab and a wide variety of sources. Whether you're looking at the Federal Reserve from Atlanta, they have a great GDP app called GDP Now to help you understand how GDP is projected and what the impact is on the economy and maybe the impact on your environment. So let's start with option number 3, right? So option number 3 is if the virus is contained and growth returns, that the overall GDP, which is about 20.2 million right now, will be dropped in the US by 2.5%. And we will return to pre-crisis levels at the end of this year. That's that V-shaped curve that everyone on the news talks about, right? Well, I have a hard time believing that's going to happen, right? We all can see what's happening in Florida, in Georgia, in Texas, in California, right? They're reopening, right, without having the virus contained. So returning to pre-crisis levels in the end of this year, I have a hard time to believe, because GDP is driven 70% by consumer spending. And if we're not confident that we can be safe, right, then we're not going to go out and spend. Therefore, then the GDP is going to decline. Option 2, I think, is somewhere between option 1 and option 2, where the virus is going to recur. It's going to be continuous, but the world will experience a strong rebound. In part, this has to do with America and other countries continuing to provide economic solutions from a government perspective, right? You have the Federal Reserve. What are they doing? They're buying billions of bank notes to make sure that banks can continue to provide liquid. And liquidity provides the ability to accrue debt. And debt drives our economy. And without that, you have a recession. So this scenario here is about a 7.9% drop this year in GDP, which means you return to pre-crisis levels at the end of 2021. So if you're someone who's having a slowdown right now, right, then you're thinking, okay, my slowdown right now is going to continue for another year, right? So in that period of year, what can you do to reimagine your organization by leaning into data governance, data integrity, creating a single source? So when you come out of this, let's say another year of disruption of COVID, you're able to be resilient and take off. And if you are, let's say, one of the organizations who are in a vertical where you're experiencing a boom, how can you double down? How can you leverage the financial success that you're experiencing now by making sure you can push into data to make sure that when this time stops, you continue to accelerate? Now, option 1 is where I want to continue to convince myself that this is not a reality, right? But whenever I look at the Congressional Budget Office documents or the Federal Reserve, there's 12 regional Federal Reserves and 24 branches, right? And they all are telling me the same thing. This collective consciousness says GDP will drop this year by 8.1%. Why is that? Well, it dropped by 5% in Q1. Estimate was 4.8. It's projected to drop by, I think, 35. It's between 35% and 50% to drop in Q2. I'm hoping for 35%. Q3 and Q4, hoping for 20 and 5% increase in GDP. But that only happens if we reopen carefully and we begin to contain the virus appropriately. And if we do those things, right, then consumer spending will come back. Those who are experiencing a slowdown will start having people feel more comfortable to giving those contributions again. And those who are experiencing a boom, you may have some pullback in your metrics, but you're set up for success. So the point of this whole slide is to think through, what is my minimum disruption time for COVID? The globe thinks it's 10 months. Some will say 16 months. Like if you're in the financial market, if you're in the energy market, if you're healthcare IT, probably 6 to 8 months. But the bottom line, take this time to figure out what's working, what's not. Lean into data intelligence, data governance. So when you come out of this, you can accelerate analytics to push you to new levels never thought possible. I think that's the last slide. One more slide. Questions?
Thank you very much. That was a lot of information to cover in a pretty short period of time. We do have a couple questions that have come in. Cathy, the first one is for you. Going back towards the beginning of the program, and you shared the rule of tens used to calculate the cost of bad data. Can you share more about the research or the science behind that rule of tens?
Yeah, so Harvard's actually done quite a bit of work around that rule itself, and understanding that basically the effort to fix the data and to get back to a point where it's clean is 10 times more than if the data comes in perfectly and you've managed it. So it's an understanding of what you have to do to get that record or that piece of data back to a place where it's in a manageable and usable shape. So that makes sense.
And I imagine that exercise, I agree, I wouldn't want to do it on a Friday afternoon, but 100 records to go through. I'm sure that's very eye-opening and starts to set some priorities.
Yeah, it can be very eye-opening. And, there are ways to make it a little bit more pleasurable. Looking at data is not a lot of fun. But, if you get 4 or 5 people together, maybe you add a beer or a cocktail, you can look at bad data with a drink. So,
right.
And just sort of understand that, and make a game out of it even, where can you find the errors? It does help you to really understand. And it does it without having to look at, your entire database, by just taking a section of it and figuring out what's there. It's a process that has been run by a lot of organizations now, and looking at their data, and they're finding it very successful, and not fixing all the issues, but in figuring out sort of what the level of quality of my data is, so that you can figure out what to do next.
Right, and that is I would say, the most important statement. What is my level of concern with quality data? Where do I reside on the 15 to 25% threshold? Am I at 15, 20? I'm lucky if I'm at 10. And if I'm at that, then I can acknowledge the truth and begin to put in a process to improve my data quality, and therefore my opportunity to generate more revenue.
Right. And I think that the idea is, when you sit down and run a report or do analysis, is it like, oh my gosh, I know I'm going to have to check this when I'm done? Or do you feel comfortable with just running the report and the analysis and getting to it? And that's the ultimate goal, right? Is that you can just use your data and feel comfortable and not have to second guess yourself, which, we all spend an inordinate amount of time at double checking ourselves or checking our numbers to make sure. But getting to that position is unbelievably liberating. Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
T, you talked about I think it was on the roadmap slide, you talked about the data integration has to be a cultural shift.
Mm-hmm.
I think the data hygiene, there's a lot of this that has to be a cultural shift. I think cultural shifts can be harder than technology transitions, migrations. So have you seen some best practices that if everybody on this webinar was nodding along saying, yes, we agree, we need to do all these things, I've tried, I run into a brick wall, or who's going to own this? What are some best practices that you've seen that people can take back and start the motor running?
Well, I think whenever you're looking to initiate a cultural shift, it has to start with leadership, right? At the highest level. If leadership doesn't buy in, then nothing materializes, right? And if leadership buys in and you have a vision, but you don't create all the tactical action, then nothing again materializes. So I think one of the first things you must do for any cultural shift, whether it's adopting data, hygiene and quality and governance, or whether it's, living by advanced analytics or moving into digital, get the buy-in, right, at the highest level, and then create the roadmap. How long will it take? How much do you have to spend? Are there shortcuts? What are the platforms out there, for business intelligence tools that we should leverage to create into our process? Do we use X versus Y? What are the analytic solutions? Does artificial intelligence even matter for the level of maturation that I'm in? So at the end of the day, leadership up, push down, create a vision with action, have a time frame that's realistic, and then be fluid and accept that you're going to probably fall and take steps back because people get comfortable doing what they're doing and they don't always want to say, you know what, that's too much. I don't have time for that. I got to deliver, right? It's going to feel painful and it's going to be hard. Change worth doing is challenging. It is hard. But once you get past that and you accept that, you change, the culture changes, and you come on the other side of that rainbow.
With looking at the COVID situation, and some organizations are seeing a big change in giving right now. Change could go in either direction.
Yeah.
Are you, and this is getting into a little bit into the weeds, but are you advising or recommending that people look at current donors differently than they would during to donors during kind of peacetime?
Yeah, you know, I'll start first, and Cathy, feel free to jump in. You know, I think we have no choice but to look at this donor class that's giving a little differently, right? Especially if you're in the human services or if you're not, right? We need, you know, now we can say they're emergency donor-ish, right? But the research still needs to be done to uncover, are they going to be kind of a one and done donor? Or is this movement or moment creating some type of emotive state for them where they're connected to the organization more than ever before? People once upon a time were giving to 6 to 8 organizations. Now maybe they're going to 4 to 6. They've chosen you. So then how do we change our marketing communication to talk to them in the emotive way or even the rational way of why they gave to you? And that's where you get into, again, having a single source of the information, being channel agnostic, thinking of being a globalist and looking at the donor view. And how do we leverage the email and the display ads and the direct mail pieces and maybe mobile messaging that paints a comprehensive story that speaks to not the middle. You know, we're notorious for speaking to the middle well. We need to begin to adopt what I would call enterprise segmentation, where we're speaking to the micro people, the micro messages, the micro populations within the group. Not everybody's the same, right? So we need to figure out this donor class, how are they different? Do they look different? You know, lifestyle, age, you name it. Maybe even with surveys, can we provide some qualitative insights to map onto the behavioral side to see, are they different? If they are, they deserve a different message.
Right, and I would say, you know, in some cases we're seeing the holy grail where people are getting those donors they've always been trying to get, those younger donors. You know, how do we finally, you know, we finally got some of them after all this time. How do we continue to communicate to them differently so we can get them to give again? And I think he's right. We tend to think of emergency donors as one and done, but you know, I think in this case we may have a whole new universe of donors, and we can really peel back the onion and figure out how these are different from our typical donors on our file and speak to them differently. I think it's a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, I think just to add one more thing on that, I think, you know, in the past, the industry has made mistakes with thinking, you know, if there's an environmental negative shift, you know, we got all these 10,000 new donors, that's great. We're going to just throw them into the regular machine. And then we go, why aren't they responding? Well, you're not talking to them differently. You're giving them the same thing. You know, we need to learn from history and be a little better in how we talk to them.
Right, and that's where integrating the data, because you know you have to be looking at your online donors, your offline donors, you know, everybody together, and understand all of that information. So because they are coming in now, we're seeing a lot more online giving from direct mail donors right now. People are acting differently, so we need to be reactive to what they're doing and keep up with them. Right, it's about the donors, it's not about us.
And that messaging, especially when you see digital rise. Right? Digital, we need to be very careful because we could look at results and create a false narrative. We got all these new donors in digital, but as we change how we talk to them again, using kind of that single source information, usually digital retention as they transition is always going to be lower than direct mail, unless digital has grown off the backs of direct mail donors, right? And so for digital, how can we be more present? how can you can even be more fluid to speak to the individual, right? So that you can make sure that as they transition from new donors, that you get a 30-something% retention rate, which is usually not seen within digital for a transition donor. So digital really has to play a strong presence in leading forward around messaging and work together with direct mail. And too often I don't see them working together in harmony.
You're both really speaking to our campaign, hashtag Tell Us What You Love, which we launched back in February when things looked somewhat different, but it's not a new story about the importance of collecting first party data, you know, asking the questions or either directly or indirectly collecting that and then reflecting that, which for an animal organization could be, are you a dog person or a cat person? It could be a health organization, it's grateful patient versus family member versus, you know, somebody else. So, you know, but again, that's something that organizations, we all nod and say this is really important. But you get into those data silos, you get into the data ownership, turf battles, and I think just a lack of awareness, particularly maybe on the programmatic side or of just the value of those donors. So maybe you've already covered on this, but even outside of this COVID moment opportunity, are there some, you know, do you have any case study anecdotes of organizations that have really crossed that hurdle successfully with stakeholder and ally data?
So I'm trying to think how to rephrase the question. So are you asking if we've seen current examples of those who have data integrated appropriately and are using it in this time to lead to success? Is that the question, really?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that if you have an answer to that question, that's an excellent way to repose it. Or also just in general, collecting stakeholder data, asking, and then really ensuring that it's filtering through all the ways that you're connecting with that individual, which can be as a donor, it can be as a, you know, volunteer, as a stakeholder, as an activist. It's much harder than it sounds. Have you seen some really, really great examples you could share?
You want to go first, Cathy, and then I'll jump in?
Yeah, so I have seen some. So a hospital group that we work with, we did a project last year where we basically went through the organization and figured out really how everybody was being touched. You know, not just through the direct marketing program is what happens, right? Where else? So the education program, the events program, you know, whatever else. And what we found, which helped to just sort of shift the communication, was their best donors, in some cases, were getting 30 plus emails a month because everybody wanted them, right? They reacted to education. They came to events. They gave. They were getting clobbered. And the rest of the donors were getting underserved, I would say, in terms of communication. So putting that information together and really being able to measure it across the whole organization, it's hard. But when you do it, it gives you a completely different view, I think, of how you should be communicating with your donor and who maybe is ignoring you altogether, not because you are hitting them 30 times a month between email and communication. You know, it takes a long way to get there, but I think it's incredibly valuable, and your donors start to respect you when you're communicating at a cadence that's not underserving them or overserving them. And it's a hard balance, but I have seen it work. It just takes a lot of digging.
Yeah, I would say I think we're at probably an inflection point where people are more desirous to get there, right? They don't know how to get there, but they know they want it, right? And so in the area of analytics, I see people more willing to give me everything. I'm greedy when it comes to analytics. You know, I don't care if all we're focusing on is direct mail or digital or both. I want to see everything. And I think more people are open to give you everything so you can see, you know, where the connections are or the lack thereof. So you can pinpoint to them where there's obvious data integrity issues that are holding them back to where it becomes a priority. If you want me to do X, then you must fix Y first. Otherwise, we're going down to a false pathway that's not going to allow you to be successful. So I don't think anyone has really solved it yet. I'm not sure how many people are there yet in my mind. You know, I have a high bar that I want people to jump over. But I think people are trying to take steps to get there. And they're recognizing that you know what, it's not going to be a 1-year plan. It has to be 5 years, maybe even longer to get there. And they're starting to adopt that. And those who adopt that, in my experience, are those that are, finding success better than others. Okay.
Thank you. And I think, T, to a point that you were making on that COVID slide is perhaps if an organization hasn't made it very far down this path yet, this is a good opportunity to start. We have this, what is potentially a unique class of donors coming in right now. Now is a good time to start to collect that and then backfill with other donors as you go forward.
Right. Leverage the power. If you're experiencing an uptick, leverage that financial power now. Go to your board and first do the research to find out these donors that are coming in, what do they look like? Do they have the potential to spread out, to give to other marketing channels? What has been your conversion rate and likelihood of moving people throughout your organization? And then identify what is the revenue that one channel drives in others. There's the hidden heavies, right? You may find for direct mail, as an example, for some organizations, 70% of planned giving comes from direct mail, right? You may find that for major donors, 40% comes from direct mail. Digital, you may find supports retention for other channels that you didn't even think about because you're doing the appropriate, display ads where you're looking at Facebook as a last click, but other impressions are really driving that last click conversion, right? So I think if you are experiencing it, use that financial power to get that revenue in and build the case for data integration. So when this runway of COVID ends, you can continue to move forward.
Well, Cathy and T, thank you so much for being with us today, for leading us on this journey through data, the value of data, and the importance of taking action now to break down some of those silos, both culturally and with regard to technology. So we appreciate your time and expertise today with the Nonprofit Alliance. For everyone watching, as a registered attendee, you will receive an email from us within about the next 24 hours with a link to this recording. We also encourage you to reach out to Cathy and T with any questions or needs for your organization. And please stay in touch with us for future events by going to our website, tnpa.org, and checking the events page. Everyone, take care, be well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.